"Here's your order," said the Mafia Boss. She was expecting a delivery driver. "Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's tale. It was a cold Thursday evening, and Samantha stood by her window, staring out into the rain-soaked streets of Brooklyn. She had been eagerly waiting for her delivery, a package she'd ordered earlier that week, something simple, a little treat for herself after a long and exhausting work week. Her apartment was small, tucked away in the corner of a building on a quiet street, but she liked it that way. The peace, the calm, it was a refuge from the chaos of her demanding job at the law firm. As the clock ticked, Samantha noticed the headlights of a car pulling up to the curb outside her building. She squinted through the window, expecting the usual delivery truck. Instead, a sleek black SUV came to a stop in front of her door. Her brows furrowed in confusion. That wasn't right. Her package wasn't supposed to come in a luxury vehicle. She stood there for a moment, debating whether to open the door, but curiosity got the better of her. She grabbed the delivery receipt off the kitchen counter and made her way to the front door, wondering if there had been a mix-up. When she opened the door, she was greeted by a tall man, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, the kind of suit that made you stop and take notice. His dark eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race, and his expression was unreadable, cold almost. "Here's your order," he said, his voice smooth, with an unmistakable accent she couldn't place. Samantha blinked, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what to think. This man wasn't a delivery driver. Was there some kind of mistake? "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Samantha began, her voice steady but filled with confusion. "I was expecting a delivery from a regular courier, not," she trailed off, gesturing to the man in front of her. "I'm not sure what this is about." The man didn't seem to react to her confusion. He simply held out a small package, wrapped in a nondescript brown paper. "It's exactly what you ordered," he said with a cold smile. "Now, if you'll take it, we can move on." His words were calm, but there was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't asking for her consent. He was stating a fact, as if she had no other choice but to accept it. Samantha hesitated. There was something about the way he stood there, the way his presence seemed to dominate the space around him, that made her instinctively step back. She didn't like the feeling in the pit of her stomach, the unease creeping up her spine. But what could she do? She'd already opened the door. Reluctantly, she took the package from his hands, her fingers brushing against his. For just a second, she felt a strange shiver run through her, but she quickly dismissed it as nothing more than the cold air. "Thank you," she said, trying to sound confident, though she wasn't sure why she felt the need to thank him. The man nodded, his lips curving into a slight smile. "You're welcome," he said, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. "And remember, you ordered this." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away without another word. The SUV's engine roared to life, and the car sped off into the night, leaving Samantha standing there, holding the mysterious package, feeling more unsettled than she had in a long time. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, Samantha stood frozen, still holding the package, her mind racing. What had just happened? Why had that man brought her the package, and why did he look at her with such intensity? She glanced down at the plain, brown-wrapped box in her hands, wondering if there was some kind of hidden message or meaning behind it. The uncertainty gnawed at her, making her feel both intrigued and unnerved. She walked over to her small kitchen table and set the package down, her hands trembling slightly. She reached for a knife, slicing through the tape with precision. Inside, there was nothing particularly fancy, just a plain, black envelope with a single piece of paper inside. Samantha's curiosity piqued. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the neatly written message. "You belong to us now. The debt is yours to pay." Her heart skipped a beat, her stomach dropping. What was this? Was this some kind of joke? Was she being pranked? She reread the message several times, but no matter how many times she tried, it made no sense. She didn't know anyone who would send her something like this. She looked around the apartment, feeling suddenly like the walls were closing in on her. Was it possible that someone had been watching her? Had they mistaken her for someone else? That seemed too far-fetched, yet the words on the paper felt so real, so calculated. Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some random mistake. Her hand went to her phone, but before she could dial the number of her best friend, Carmen, the doorbell rang again, interrupting her thoughts. She froze. It was too soon for another delivery, and there was no way anyone knew she was at home right now. She cautiously approached the door, peeking through the peephole. To her surprise, it wasn't a delivery person this time. It was the same man. The same tall, imposing figure from earlier. His dark eyes were locked onto her through the door, and this time, he wasn't carrying a package. He was holding something else, an envelope. Samantha's pulse quickened. What did he want now? Should she open the door? She hesitated, but then she heard his voice from the other side. I see you've received the package. Open the door, Samantha. We need to talk. Something about his calm, controlled voice made her skin crawl. There was no pleading, no begging. Just an undeniable command. She stood there for a moment, considering her options. Could she just ignore him? Could she pretend she never saw him? The thought of him standing out there, watching her, sent a shiver down her spine. She opened the door a crack, just enough to get a glimpse of him. What is this? Why are you here? She asked, her voice shaky. The man's lips curled into a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. We need to discuss your debt. It's time you understood exactly what you've gotten yourself into. Samantha took a step back, her mind whirling with questions. Debt? I don't know. Anyone anything. I don't know you. The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold calculation. Oh, but you do. You see, you were chosen, Samantha. Your father's debts were passed down to you. It's time to pay the price. She gasped, feeling like the ground had just slipped out from under her. Her father? What was he talking about? Her father had passed away years ago. How could he still be involved in this? Before she could ask another question, the man stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. He held out the envelope he was carrying. This is for you, he said. It's a contract. You'll read it, and you'll sign it. No more questions. No more hesitation. Samantha looked down at the envelope in his hand, feeling the weight of it in the air between them. She took a step back, shaking her head. I don't want anything to do with this. I don't know what you think I owe, but I'm not signing anything. The man's expression hardened, and for a moment, the air between them felt thick with tension. You don't have a choice, Samantha. This is bigger than you. You've been involved whether you like it or not. He shoved the envelope into her hands, and she recoiled slightly at the force of it. She looked at the envelope in her hands, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. She wanted to throw it away, to ignore it, and pretend none of this had happened. But something about his tone, something about his presence, made her realize that if she didn't follow through, there would be consequences she wasn't prepared to face. Samantha stood there in the doorway, unsure of what to do. Her heart was racing, her hands shaking as she held the envelope. This was real, too real, and the man standing in front of her wasn't leaving anytime soon. She needed to make a choice. She could feel her world turning upside down in an instant, and she knew that the moment she opened that envelope, there was no going back. The door shut with a soft thud, leaving Samantha standing there, holding the envelope in her trembling hands. The weight of the moment felt heavier than the air around her. She glanced down at the thick, unmarked envelope, the words from the man still echoing in her head. You've been involved whether you like it or not. Her heart raced as she turned the envelope over, feeling the pressure of the situation bearing down on her. She knew that something was wrong, but the nagging feeling at the back of her mind told her that she couldn't walk away from this. Not anymore. Samantha took a deep breath, steadying her hands as she tore open the envelope. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper. It was printed with neat, sharp text, but the words seemed foreign, distant. By accepting this contract, you agree to pay the debt in full by any means necessary. The debt passed down to you from your late father must be cleared, or there will be consequences. She read the sentence over and over, trying to make sense of it. Her father? She had no idea what debts he might have left behind. He had been a quiet man, a man who kept his struggles hidden behind closed doors. But debt to the mafia? She couldn't wrap her head around it. As she stood there, staring at the paper, a sudden knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She jumped, her heart pounding. Without thinking, she walked toward the door, the contract still in her hand. She opened it cautiously, only to find the same man standing there. This time, he wasn't alone. Two other men flanked him, their eyes scanning the apartment with an air of quiet authority. The man at the door didn't speak immediately. He just looked at her with that same cold, calculating expression. "I trust you've read the contract." His voice was smooth, but there was a sharp edge to it that made Samantha uneasy. She nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. "Yes, but I don't understand. My father's debts, what are you talking about? He's been gone for years." The man stepped into the apartment without waiting for an invitation, his presence overwhelming. He gestured for the other two men to stay behind. "Your father's debts weren't cleared before he passed. You should have known there would be a price to pay." His words felt like a punch to her gut. She shook her head, trying to make sense of the situation. "I don't have that kind of money. I can't pay anything." The man looked at her, his eyes never leaving hers. "That's why we're here. You have something more valuable than money." Samantha froze, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was calculating, cold. "You'll do exactly what we say, and in return, your debt will be cleared. You'll work for us." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Samantha couldn't breathe. She felt trapped, cornered by the unknown, by the debt her father had left behind. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I'm not going to work for you. I don't even know you." The man didn't seem surprised by her refusal. He stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have a choice, Samantha. This is bigger than you. Your father knew this, and now it's your turn to pay the price. You don't get to decide." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, silver key. "This is for the next phase of your debt. You'll come with us." Samantha's mind raced, trying to figure out an escape plan, but she was paralyzed. The key, the envelope, everything seemed like a twisted nightmare she couldn't wake up from. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "Just let me go. I'll figure something out. I can't be a part of this." The man's eyes softened for a moment, but only for a brief second. "You're already involved. There's no going back." With that, he handed her the key. "Go to the address on this key. Don't ask questions. Just do as you're told, and this will all be over." Samantha felt the weight of the key in her hand. She looked down at it, almost afraid to touch it. The man turned to leave, his two associates following him silently. Just before he stepped out the door, he looked back at her. "Remember, Samantha, you belong to us now. Don't forget that." The door clicked shut, leaving her standing there, frozen and holding the key to something she didn't understand. Her heart was pounding, her mind reeling. What was she supposed to do now? There was no going back. She had to go to the address. She had no choice. But the question remained, where was this all leading? What would she have to do to clear her father's debt? And could she ever escape this world once she stepped into it? The key felt heavy in Samantha's palm as she walked down the narrow hallway of her apartment building. It was late, the lights flickering as she made her way toward the exit. The door was heavy, the kind that creaked ominously as she pushed it open, stepping out into the rain-soaked night. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the quiet streets of Brooklyn, but her mind was anything but quiet. The man's words replayed in her head, each one a cold reminder of how much her life had changed in the span of a single day. She didn't know what to expect, but the unsettling feeling in her gut told her she wasn't walking towards safety. She was walking towards something dark, something dangerous. The address on the key led her to an old building in an industrial part of town, far from her neighborhood. The streets were empty, the only sounds the soft hum of distant traffic and the occasional car passing by. She approached the door, her hand trembling as she inserted the key into the lock. It clicked, and the door swung open with a groan. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of old wood. The hallway stretched out in front of her, lit only by the dim glow of overhead lights. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside, the weight of the silence pressing down on her. She hesitated, her mind racing with questions. What had she gotten herself into? Who were these people, and what did they want from her? She was about to turn back when she heard footsteps approaching from the darkened hallway ahead. She froze. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing, his face partially obscured by the dim light. It was him, the man who had given her the key. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You came," he said, his voice calm but with an edge that made her uneasy. "I didn't have a choice," Samantha replied, her voice shaky, her nerves getting the best of her. The man nodded slowly, as if he expected nothing less. You've done well. But this is where things get complicated. We don't give you a choice because there is none. You're already in this, Samantha. Your father's debt has passed to you, and now you have to pay it. Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. I don't even know what this is, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You will, he replied. But first, there's someone you need to meet. He gestured toward the door at the end of the hallway. Follow me. Samantha hesitated for a moment, but then, realizing she had no other option, followed him down the dark corridor. Her steps felt heavy, each one echoing in the silence. As they reached the door, the man knocked twice, sharply, and then entered without waiting for a response. Samantha stepped inside after him, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The room was sparse, furnished only with a table and a few chairs. A man sat at the table, his back to her. He was older, with graying hair and a stern expression. He turned to face her as they entered, his eyes hard and cold. You must be Samantha, he said, his voice low but commanding. We've been waiting for you. Samantha took a step back, her heart racing. Who are you? She asked, her voice trembling. The older man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her with a sharp, appraising gaze. You don't need to know everything, he said finally. What you need to know is that your father owed us a lot of money. And now it's your turn to make good on that debt. Samantha shook her head, the words making no sense. I can't, she said, her voice cracking. I don't have that kind of money. I can't pay this. The older man leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Money isn't what we're after, he said coldly. We have other ways of collecting. And you, Samantha, will pay it back, one way or another. His words hung in the air, heavy with threat. Samantha felt trapped, like she was caught in a web she couldn't escape. She had no idea what these people were capable of, but everything about the situation screamed danger. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice barely audible. The older man smiled, a thin, cruel smile. You'll do as you're told. We'll provide you with the details. All you need to do is follow through. Samantha stood there, feeling like she was suffocating. The man stood up from the table, walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. He stopped just a few feet away, his gaze fixed on her with cold intensity. You don't have a choice, Samantha, he said softly. This is your new life now, and you will obey, or else. Samantha swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling heavily on her shoulders. She had been thrust into this world by no choice of her own, and now she was stuck. The reality of her situation began to sink in. There was no turning back. She had entered a world she didn't understand, and all she could do now was survive it. The older man turned and walked toward the door, his voice echoing in the room. Remember, Samantha, you belong to us now. The days that followed felt like a blur to Samantha. She had tried to go on with her normal routine, but every moment was clouded by the memory of the man's cold words. You belong to us now. The words echoed in her mind, leaving her with a constant sense of unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had been taken from her in the blink of an eye. Every time she walked down the street, she wondered if someone was watching her. Every phone call, every knock at the door, sent her heart racing. The weight of the contract in her hand was a constant reminder of the world she had unwittingly entered. A world that was darker, more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. That afternoon, she was sitting at her kitchen table, trying to focus on the small project she had been working on for the past few weeks. She had tried to distract herself, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the meeting with the older man. She kept telling herself that she had no choice. She had to do what they wanted. If she didn't, the consequences could be worse than anything she could imagine. The doorbell rang, and Samantha jumped, startled. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. She stood up slowly, her palms sweating. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the door and peered through the peephole. Standing outside was the same tall man from the other day, the one who had handed her the envelope. He was holding a folder in his hand, his expression as cold and unreadable as before. She hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. You again, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, though her hands trembled. What do you want now? The man didn't waste any time. We have a job for you, he said flatly, pushing past her into the apartment. Samantha stepped back, trying to keep her composure. A job? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded. You'll be going to a meeting tonight. You'll take this folder, he handed it to her, and you'll make sure it gets to the right person. Samantha looked down at the folder in her hands, her stomach churning. What's inside? She asked, though she was already afraid of the answer. The man's eyes darkened. You don't need to know. You just need to deliver it. No questions asked. Samantha's mind raced. She wanted to refuse, to fight back, but something in the man's eyes told her that wouldn't be wise. Who am I delivering it to? She asked, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. That's not your concern, he replied, his voice icy. You'll know when you get there. All you need to do is follow the instructions. The address is in the folder. He turned to leave, but then paused. Remember, Samantha, you belong to us now. You do this, or there will be consequences. His words sent a chill down her spine. She had no choice. She had to do this, even if she had no idea what she was getting herself into. After the man left, Samantha stood there for a moment, staring at the folder in her hands. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Who were these people, and what did they want from her? What was in that folder? And why did she feel like her life was spiraling out of control? She opened the folder carefully, her hands shaking as she unfolded the piece of paper inside. The address was written in bold, black ink. It wasn't far from where she lived, just a few blocks away in a part of town she wasn't familiar with. The address was on a street lined with abandoned warehouses and dark alleys. Samantha's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the address. She had to go. She had no choice. She grabbed her coat and walked out the door, her breath visible in the cold night air. Every step she took felt heavier than the last. The streets seemed empty, the only sound the soft click of her shoes against the pavement. As she reached the corner of the street, she looked around nervously, half expecting someone to jump out at her from the shadows. When she finally arrived at the address, she found herself standing in front of a large, old building. The windows were dark, the door locked. She glanced around, but there was no sign of anyone else. Her pulse quickened as she reached for the door, her fingers trembling. She knocked once, then twice, but no one answered. She stood there, unsure of what to do. Just as she was about to turn away, the door creaked open. A man stood in the doorway, his face shadowed by the dim light from inside. Are you Samantha? He asked, his voice low. She nodded, her throat dry. Yes, she whispered. The man stepped aside, motioning for her to come inside. She hesitated for a moment before stepping into the building. It was even darker inside, and the air felt thick with dust. The man led her down a long hallway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. At the end of the hallway, he opened a door and motioned for her to enter. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single lamp. A man sat behind a desk, his back to her. The man at the door nodded at her. She's here, he said quietly before stepping back and leaving her alone. Samantha took a deep breath and stepped into the room. The man behind the desk turned around, his eyes cold and calculating. She froze when she saw him. He was tall, wearing a suit that looked too expensive for anyone she knew. But it was his eyes that made her heart stop. She had seen those eyes before. The same eyes that had watched her. The same eyes that had made her feel like she was drowning. The man smiled, a cold, twisted smile. I'm glad you came, Samantha, he said. You're just in time. As the door clicked shut behind her, Samantha's heart raced. The man sitting behind the desk turned to face her, and for a moment, she froze. There was something chilling about the way he looked at her. His eyes, cold and calculating, seemed to pierce right through her, assessing her as if she were nothing more than a pawn in a game he controlled. He wasn't the man who had handed her the folder earlier, but he exuded the same sense of power. She could feel it in the air. Sit down, Samantha, he said, his voice smooth, yet it held an undeniable authority. Reluctantly, she obeyed. She didn't have much of a choice. The room was stark, almost clinical in its simplicity. A large desk dominated the space, and the only other furniture was a few chairs and a bookshelf filled with thick, leather-bound books. There was no warmth in the room, just a sterile atmosphere that made her feel more like an object than a person. As she sat down, the man leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her face. You're here because you're in debt, he said, his tone flat, matter-of-fact. But not in the way you think. Samantha's breath caught in her throat. I don't owe you anything, she protested weakly. I don't even know you. He smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was more of a grim, knowing expression. Your father did. he replied, his words cutting through the air like a knife. And now, the debt passes to you. Samantha shook her head, unable to process what he was saying. My father's dead, she whispered. He's been gone for years. The man's expression remained unchanged. His debts didn't die with him. They come to you now, just as they came to him. Samantha's stomach twisted into knots. She had no idea what kind of debts her father had left behind, but she knew enough to understand that this wasn't a simple matter. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice trembling. The man leaned forward, placing his elbows on the desk. We need your help, he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. You'll work for us, and in return, your father's debt will be cleared. It's that simple. Samantha recoiled. I'm not working for you, she said, her voice stronger now, though her fears still gnawed at her. You have no choice, he replied coolly. Either you work for us, or we take something more valuable. She didn't need to ask what he meant. The threat hung in the air, suffocating and clear. She didn't know how she had gotten tangled up in this mess. But there was no escaping now. What kind of work? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He smiled again, but this time there was a glint of something darker in his eyes. You'll do whatever we ask. Simple tasks at first, but eventually, you'll be involved in much bigger things. Things that require someone like you. Someone with the right skills, the right connections. Samantha felt the ground beneath her feet shift. What are you talking about? She asked, though she was already beginning to piece things together. I'm not involved in anything illegal. I can't. He held up a hand, silencing her. You're already involved, he said, his voice hardening. The moment you agreed to take that key, to come here, you became part of this. There's no turning back. Samantha felt a sense of panic rising in her chest. She had thought she could walk away, that there was still a way out. But this man was right. There was no turning back. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I don't want this, she said, her voice breaking. I just want to go home. The man's gaze softened for a moment, but it didn't make her feel any better. Home is no longer an option for you, Samantha, he said gently. You've been drawn into something bigger than you can understand. But don't worry, he continued, his voice becoming almost soothing. We'll take care of you. You'll be part of the family. And when the time comes, you'll understand why all of this is necessary. Samantha felt a chill settle over her as she stared at him, unsure of what to do next. She didn't trust him, but she didn't have a choice. What now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. Now, you begin your work, he said. You'll report to me directly. I'll give you your first assignment soon. Until then, you're free to go. But remember, Samantha, you're ours now. There's no turning back. Samantha stood up slowly, her legs weak beneath her. She wanted to scream, to run, but something deep inside told her that was a terrible idea. She couldn't fight these people. Not yet. Not until she understood what they wanted from her. She walked to the door, her heart heavy with dread. As she opened it, the man spoke one last time. You'll be back, Samantha. We always get what we want. She stepped out into the hallway, her mind racing. She had no idea what her next move should be, but one thing was certain. Her life was no longer her own. The next few days were a blur for Samantha. She tried to carry on as normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every moment was filled with the looming knowledge of the dangerous world she had been dragged into. The man's words, "You belong to us now," echoed in her mind relentlessly. She couldn't escape them. She couldn't escape the weight of the contract that had bound her to them. The sense of dread never left her, hanging in the air like a thick fog. It was as if her life had been hijacked, and she was just going through the motions of a script she hadn't written. She tried to focus on her job, to get back to some semblance of normalcy, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every knock on her door made her heart race. Every stranger on the street felt like a potential threat. She didn't trust anyone anymore. That evening, as she was about to turn off the lights and go to bed, the phone rang. Samantha hesitated before answering it. She already knew who it was. The voice on the other end confirmed her suspicions. "Samantha, we have a job for you," the man said, his tone as cold and authoritative as ever. "We need you to meet someone." Samantha swallowed hard. "Meet someone? Who? That's not important," the man replied. "What matters is that you do as you're told. Go to the address I'm sending you. You'll know what to do when you get there." He hung up before she could ask any more questions. Samantha's heart pounded as she stared at the phone, trying to steady her breath. This was it. The moment she had feared. She had no choice but to comply. She grabbed the coat that hung by the door and left the apartment, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. The streets outside were quiet, and the rain had begun to fall, soft and steady. As she made her way to the address, Samantha's mind raced with possibilities. She had no idea what she was walking into, but the feeling of dread had intensified. The city seemed to close in on her as she approached the location. It was an old building, abandoned and run down, with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. The kind of place that felt forgotten, left behind by everyone. She knocked on the door, her knuckles rapping against the wood with a soft but insistent rhythm. There was no answer at first, and for a moment, she wondered if she had been sent here as some kind of test. But then the door creaked open, and she found herself face to face with another man. This one was different from the others. He was taller, with dark, piercing eyes that seemed to assess her with a single glance. He didn't speak immediately, just motioned for her to enter. She hesitated, but then stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of old wood and dust. She followed the man down a long hallway, her footsteps echoing in the silence. He stopped in front of a door and turned to her. "He's waiting for you," he said quietly, before opening the door and stepping aside. Samantha entered the room, her nerves on edge. The man behind the desk didn't look up at first, his attention focused on something in front of him. But then, as she stepped closer, he looked up, and for the first time, she saw his face clearly. It was the same man who had given her the key, the man who had told her that she belonged to them. His cold, calculating gaze locked onto hers, and a chill ran down her spine. "You came," he said, his voice steady, almost pleased. Samantha couldn't speak at first. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. "What is this?" she asked finally, her voice shaky. "What do you want from me?" The man stood up slowly, walking around the desk toward her. "We need your help," he said, his voice low and persuasive. "There's someone you need to meet. Someone who can help you understand what you're really a part of." Samantha shook her head, her confusion deepening. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean? What's going on?" The man smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. "You'll understand soon enough," he said, his tone still calm but carrying a sense of finality. "For now, you're here because you have a role to play, and you will play it. This is your life now." Samantha's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of his words crashing down on her. She wanted to run, to escape, but she knew deep down that there was nowhere to run. The man gestured toward a chair, and without thinking, she sat down. The man stepped back and gave her a moment to process, though she wasn't sure what she was supposed to be processing. "You don't have a choice," he said softly, his voice almost reassuring. "But trust me, Samantha, when this is all over, you'll understand why it had to be you. Why your father's debt became your debt. Why you were chosen." Samantha felt the cold weight of his words sink in. She didn't know what to say, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same again. The days blurred together for Samantha as she tried to process everything that had happened. The meeting with the man behind the desk, his calm yet chilling words, weighed heavily on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had been completely hijacked, and there was no escape. Every waking moment felt like she was in a nightmare, trapped in a world she never asked to be a part of. She had no control over her own future anymore, and the weight of her father's debts was suffocating her. That night, after the meeting, she had returned home, her thoughts in a constant state of turmoil. The instructions were clear. She was to wait for the next call. She didn't know what would come next or what was expected of her, but she knew it wouldn't be long before she was pulled deeper into this dangerous world. Samantha sat in her small apartment, staring at the phone in front of her. She had hoped for some kind of reprieve, some space to think, but deep down, she knew the call would come soon. She couldn't afford to wait. Her fingers hovered over the phone, contemplating whether to call someone for help, but the reality was clear. She couldn't trust anyone. The people she had met so far had made it clear that her world was no longer safe. The phone rang, cutting through her thoughts. She didn't have to look at the caller ID to know it was the man's voice she would hear. "Samantha." His voice was low and authoritative, just as it had been before. "There's a job for you tonight. You'll go to the address I give you. and you'll do exactly as you're told. Don't ask questions. Do not deviate from the plan. Understand? Samantha felt her pulse quicken. Her heart raced in her chest, but she didn't dare refuse. Yes, she whispered, her voice shaking. I understand. Good, he replied. The address is on your phone. You'll be meeting with a contact. Make sure the job is done without any issues. If you fail, there will be consequences. The phone call ended abruptly, leaving her with the weight of his words hanging in the air. She glanced down at the phone, the address already flashing on the screen. Her hands shook as she grabbed her coat and headed out the door. The rain had started to fall again, soaking the streets as she made her way to the location. It was just a few blocks away, but the darkness of the night seemed to make the journey longer. Every step felt heavier, as if the weight of what she was about to do was sinking in with each passing moment. She reached the location, a nondescript building tucked away in an alley, the kind of place that made her feel like she was walking into something illegal. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The door opened slowly, and a man stood in the doorway. He was tall, with a hardened face and a cold expression, much like the others she had met. You're Samantha? He asked, his voice flat and emotionless. Yes, she replied, trying to steady her breath. The man stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. As she walked in, she noticed the dimly lit interior. The walls were bare, the air stale, and there was a heavy sense of tension in the room. She followed the man down a narrow hallway, feeling her nerves tighten with every step. At the end of the hall, he stopped in front of a door and knocked. He's waiting for you, the man said, his voice low. Samantha's stomach churned. Who was waiting for her now? The man opened the door, and as she stepped inside, she was met with the sight of a man sitting behind a desk, his back to her. The room was minimal, a stark contrast to the world outside. He turned around slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. It was him, the same man who had given her the folder and told her she belonged to them. His cold smile sent a chill down her spine. Samantha, he said, his voice smooth, almost welcoming. I trust everything is going according to plan. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. What's going on? She asked, her voice trembling. You're going to help us, he replied, his tone matter of fact. We have a few more tasks for you. But first, we need to know if you're truly committed to this. This is a dangerous game, Samantha. There's no turning back once you're in. She stood there, frozen, unsure of what to say. I don't have a choice, do I? She asked softly. The man's smile widened. No, you don't. But don't worry, he added, his voice taking on a darker tone. You'll be well taken care of. There's a place for you here, Samantha. And when this is all over, you'll be rewarded for your loyalty. Samantha felt a knot form in her stomach. She didn't know if she could trust him or if any of this was worth it. But deep down, she knew she didn't have a choice. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice quiet but resigned. The man's smile faded as he stood up from behind the desk. We'll get to that soon enough. For now, I just wanted to see if you were ready. He walked toward her, his steps deliberate. Remember, Samantha, you belong to us now. You don't get to walk away. But if you do what we ask, you'll be well taken care of. And in time, you might just find that you've become indispensable. Samantha felt her chest tighten. She had no idea where this was all leading, but the path she was on seemed to have no way out. The days that followed were like a haze for Samantha. The fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that she was trapped in a world she couldn't escape from. It all became too much. She did everything she was told, following the orders she had been given without question, but each task made her feel more and more like a puppet. The man who had led her into this world, the one who called the shots, was always there, watching her every move. He seemed to know everything about her, every detail, every hesitation. She couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling that she was being controlled, that her every action was part of a bigger plan, one that she wasn't fully aware of. The jobs were becoming more intense. The people she had to meet, the things she had to do, they all felt like they were getting darker. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't walk away. One night, after completing another task, Samantha found herself back in the same dimly lit room with the man behind the desk. The cold, calculated look in his eyes never changed. It was the same look he had given her the first time they met. You're doing well, Samantha, he said, his voice smooth but distant. But we need you for something bigger now. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What's next? The man stood up and walked toward her, his every step deliberate, controlled. We've been watching you, Samantha. You're not like the others. You have the potential to go further. To be more. Samantha swallowed hard. She didn't know if that was a compliment or a threat. I don't want to be involved in any more of this, she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to stay calm. I don't belong here. The man smiled, but it was a smile that sent a shiver down her spine. Oh, but you do. You already are. You don't get to choose anymore. He paused, as if letting his words sink in. You'll work for us until the debt is paid. Until we say it's done. Samantha wanted to protest, wanted to argue, but she knew better. There was no way out. There was no way to escape this world she had been pulled into. She was in too deep. The man turned and motioned for her to sit. You'll be going to a new location tonight, he said, his voice as calm as ever. There's someone we need you to meet. It's time to take the next step. Samantha hesitated. Who is it? She asked, dreading the answer. The man's smile returned, but it was colder now, sharper. Someone who can help us with a bigger job. Someone who will make sure you understand your place here. But don't worry, Samantha. This is the final step. After this, the debt will be paid. She nodded, her stomach turning as she tried to process his words. The final step. What did that mean? Was she going to be forced to do something even worse than before? She didn't know, but she couldn't let herself think too much about it. She had no choice. The man handed her an envelope, just like the one he had given her when they first met. The address is inside. Do as you're told, and you'll be fine, he said, his tone as flat as always. And remember, Samantha, you belong to us. Don't forget that. She took the envelope, her fingers trembling as she slid it into her coat pocket. She wanted to throw it away, to run, but she knew she couldn't. She was stuck in this world, and there was no way out. She had to follow through. She had no choice. Later that night, she arrived at the address. It was an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city, tucked away from prying eyes. The darkness of the night made it feel even more ominous. Samantha knocked on the door, her hands shaking as she waited. The door opened slowly, and she was met by a man she hadn't seen before. He was tall, with a face that looked like it had seen too much. His eyes were cold, like he was sizing her up. You Samantha? He asked, his voice rough. She nodded, unsure of what to expect. Come in, he said, stepping aside to let her pass. The inside of the warehouse was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of dust, and something else she couldn't quite place. She followed him down a narrow hallway, her footsteps echoing in the silence. They stopped in front of a door, and the man knocked once before opening it. Inside, the man she had been told to meet was sitting at a desk, his face hidden in the shadows. Samantha, he said, his voice low and gravelly. I've been expecting you. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea who this man was, but there was something about him that made her feel even more trapped. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, the door shutting behind her with a soft click. Sit down, the man said, gesturing to the chair across from him. We have a lot to discuss. Samantha's mind raced as she took her seat. What had she gotten herself into? What did this man want from her? The uncertainty was eating at her, but she couldn't show it. Not now. She had to survive this, whatever it was. As Samantha sat down across from the man, the room seemed to close in on her. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift with every breath she took. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her hands, still gripping the envelope, were clammy with sweat. The man in front of her didn't speak right away. He sat back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her, his expression unreadable. She could feel his gaze like a weight on her shoulders, and for a moment, she wondered if she was making a mistake by being here. But she had no choice. She had already crossed this line, and there was no turning back. So, you're the one they've sent, the man finally said, his voice low and cold. The one who thinks she can walk away. Samantha swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. I never asked for this. I don't even know what this is. The man's lips curled into a slight smile, though there was no warmth behind it. That's the point, Samantha. You don't need to know everything. You just need to follow through. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You've been chosen for something much bigger than you realize. And you will do what we ask, or there will be consequences. His words sent a chill down Samantha's spine, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's smile widened, but there was no kindness in it. You're here because you've been marked. Your father's debt is yours now. We have business to attend to, and you'll help us with it. Samantha shook her head in disbelief. I don't understand. My father's been dead for years. How could I owe you anything? The man sighed, as if explaining something simple to a child. Your father's debts didn't disappear when he died. He made deals that involved more than just money. And now, those deals are yours to honor. He stood up and walked over to a small desk in the corner of the room, picking up a folder and tossing it onto the table in front of her. This is your first task, he said, his tone suddenly cold. You'll take this to the address listed inside. It's crucial that you don't fail. If you do, we'll come for you. Samantha stared at the folder, her heart racing. Who am I meeting? She asked, though she didn't expect an answer. That's not important, the man replied, his voice turning sharp. What's important is that you do as you're told. She felt a wave of nausea rise in her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, but she knew it wouldn't do any good. There was no escape from this. She had no choice but to comply. She picked up the folder, her hands shaking as she opened it. Inside, she found an address written in neat handwriting. The location was far from her apartment, in a part of the city she didn't recognize. Her stomach twisted with fear, but she didn't have time to think. She had to go. You'll leave now, the man said, his tone brokering no argument. And you'll do this right. No mistakes. Samantha nodded, her mouth dry. Yes, she whispered, her mind reeling. She didn't want to go, but she knew she had no choice. She had already stepped too far into this dark world. As she stood up to leave, the man's voice stopped her. Samantha, he said, his voice suddenly softer, though there was no warmth in it. You'll find that this is just the beginning. What happens next is up to you. Don't disappoint me. His words hung in the air as she turned and walked toward the door. She opened it, the cold night air hitting her face as she stepped out. Her mind was spinning as she walked down the street, the weight of the folder in her hands the only thing grounding her. She felt like a pawn, like her every move was being watched, manipulated by forces far beyond her control. The address she was headed to loomed in her mind, a dark promise of what was to come. The streets of the city seemed to close in on her as she made her way toward the meeting place. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but she had no choice. The moment she took that first step into this world, she had lost her ability to choose. She was part of something now, something dangerous and all-encompassing. And the worst part? She had no idea what it would cost her in the end. As she reached the address, her breath caught in her throat. The building was old, abandoned-looking, with no signs of life. It was the kind of place that looked forgotten by time, tucked away in the shadows of the city. She knocked on the door, her heart hammering in her chest. The seconds felt like hours as she waited for a response. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a dark figure standing inside. She couldn't see their face, but she could feel their presence. This was it. The next step. The man inside stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. She hesitated for a moment, then walked in, her pulse racing. This was the moment that would define everything. The door closed behind her, and the shadows swallowed her whole. As Samantha stepped inside the darkened building, the door clicked shut behind her, trapping her in the dim, musty room. The only light came from a single overhead bulb, casting long shadows on the cracked concrete floor. The air smelled stale, heavy with the scent of something she couldn't place, but it made her feel uneasy. She looked around, her eyes scanning the bare room. There were no windows, no furniture, just empty walls and a cold, sterile atmosphere that seemed to close in on her with each breath. She could feel the tension rising in her chest. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew she was in too deep to turn back. The man who had opened the door, the one who had let her in, stood by the wall, watching her closely. He didn't speak right away, just observed her with a calculating gaze, as if he were studying her every move. You made it, he said finally, his voice cold and emotionless. You're just in time. Samantha swallowed hard. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound confident. The man didn't answer her immediately. He stepped closer, his presence looming over her like a predator sizing up its prey. You know why you're here, he said, his voice low and steady. It's time to complete the job. Samantha's mind raced. She wanted to protest, to run, but the fear in her gut told her she had no choice but to comply. "The job?" she asked, trying to steady her breath. "What job?" The man's lips curled into a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. "The one you've been preparing for," he said. "You're here to make sure the next phase goes smoothly. You'll be meeting with someone. Someone who will help you understand your place in all of this." Samantha's heart began to pound in her chest. She felt like she was drowning in the unknown. Who was she supposed to meet? What was expected of her? The man took a step back, motioning toward a door at the far end of the room. "You'll find out soon enough," he said. "But for now, wait here. He'll be arriving shortly." Samantha didn't argue. She couldn't afford to. The man turned and walked toward the door, leaving her alone in the empty room. Her thoughts raced as she stood there, trying to calm her nerves. Every second felt like an eternity. Her mind kept returning to the same question. What had she gotten herself into? The weight of the man's words, "You're here to complete the job," echoed in her head. She didn't know what the job was, but she had a sinking feeling it was something she couldn't undo. After what felt like hours, the door at the far end of the room opened, and a tall figure stepped inside. Samantha's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the man instantly. It was the same man who had been watching her from the shadows all along. The one who had given her the folder, the one who had told her she belonged to them. He looked at her with that same cold, calculating gaze, his lips curving into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're here," he said simply, his voice smooth but cold. "You're ready." Samantha stood there, unable to speak. The room seemed to close in on her, the silence growing unbearable. The man walked toward her, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. "You're part of this now," he said, softly, almost as if he were reassuring her, though she didn't feel reassured at all. "Everything that's happened so far, your father's death, your involvement, it's all led to this moment. And now, you'll be the one who takes it to the next level." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his gaze never leaving hers. "You'll do exactly as you're told. No questions, no hesitation." Samantha's stomach twisted in knots. "What do you mean by the next level?" she asked, her voice shaking. The man smiled again, but this time, it was darker. "You'll find out soon enough. There are people who need to be taken care of, deals that need to be closed, and you're the one who will make sure it all happens." His words sent a cold shiver down her spine. She felt trapped, cornered, with no way out. The man stepped back, giving her space, though his gaze never wavered. "You'll understand when you meet with the others," he said. "They'll explain it all to you. But for now, just know this. There's no turning back. You're in this, whether you like it or not." Samantha stood there, her heart pounding, trying to make sense of what was happening. She didn't know who these people were or what kind of world she had stepped into, but one thing was clear. Her life was no longer her own. "Now," the man said, breaking her thoughts, "it's time to go." He motioned toward the door, and without another word, Samantha followed him, her legs feeling like they were made of lead. She had no idea what awaited her, but she knew it was only a matter of time before she would find out. Every step she took felt like a step deeper into a world of danger and darkness that she couldn't escape from. And no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, the fear inside her told her that she was just getting started. The cold air hit Samantha as the door to the warehouse creaked open, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. She stepped through cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest, unsure of what was waiting for her inside. The man who had led her here stopped at the threshold, giving her a moment to collect herself. His presence was imposing, and she could feel the weight of his gaze on her as she stood in the dimly lit corridor. "You're about to meet the people who make the decisions," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "They'll be the ones telling you what to do next." Samantha nodded, her stomach twisting in knots. She had no idea what she was walking into, but the fear was palpable. The man motioned for her to follow him, and she stepped forward, her steps slow and deliberate. As they reached the end of the hall, the man knocked twice on a heavy wooden door before pushing it open. Inside, a long table stretched out, surrounded by several men and women, their faces hard and unreadable. The atmosphere in the room was tense, charged with a quiet intensity. The people around the table looked up as she entered, their gazes cold and assessing. She felt the weight of their eyes on her, making her stomach churn. The man who had led her here stepped aside, allowing her to walk into the room. "Samantha," he said, his voice carrying through the silence. This is where it all begins. One of the men sitting at the table spoke first, his voice rough but calm. So, you're the one they sent. The one who's supposed to clean up the mess. Samantha felt a shiver run down her spine. She didn't know who these people were or what kind of mess they were referring to, but she knew she was in deeper than she had ever imagined. She glanced around the room, trying to gauge the reactions of the others. There was no sign of warmth here, only cold, calculated eyes that seemed to strip her bare. The man who had spoken to her earlier stood behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You'll learn quickly, he said softly. These are the people who control everything now. You'll work for them, and in return, your father's debt will be settled. Samantha's mind raced. She had hoped she could find a way out of this nightmare, but it seemed like every step she took only pulled her deeper into it. I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want any of this. The man beside her chuckled, but it wasn't a kind laugh. None of us asked for this, he said. But it's the life we live now. Samantha swallowed hard, her throat dry. She looked at the faces around her, each one unreadable, but there was an air of authority that made her feel small. What do you want from me? She asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. We want you to help us, another woman at the table said, her voice cool and composed. There's a job that needs to be done, and you're the one who's going to do it. Samantha felt her heart race. She had no idea what kind of job they were talking about, but she knew it wouldn't be good. What kind of job? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked at her, her eyes cold. A job that involves cleaning up the mess your father left behind, she said. It's not going to be easy, but you're the one who has to do it. If you don't, there will be consequences. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She couldn't escape. There was no way out. She was stuck. What exactly do you need me to do? Samantha asked, her voice shaky but determined to know what was coming. The man who had been standing behind her spoke again, his voice soft but commanding. You'll go to the address we give you. You'll meet with someone, and you'll make sure the job is done. No mistakes. Samantha nodded slowly, her mind whirling. She didn't know what she was walking into, but she knew she had no choice but to follow their orders. And if I refuse? She asked, her voice barely audible. The man smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. You don't refuse, he said softly. Not if you want to stay alive. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Samantha's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the tension in the room, the cold, suffocating air pressing down on her. You'll do it, the woman at the table said, her voice firm. You have no choice. We own you now. Samantha felt the walls closing in on her. She had no control over her life anymore. She was trapped in a world she didn't understand, doing things she never imagined she would. When do I start? She asked quietly, the fear creeping into her voice. The man who had led her into the room smiled, his eyes gleaming. Right now, he said. It's time to make sure everything goes according to plan. Samantha nodded, her heart pounding as she turned to leave the room. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear. Her life would never be the same again. The cold night air seemed to press against Samantha as she left the room, the weight of the man's words still heavy in her chest. We own you now, he had said, and somehow, those words seemed to cling to her skin, reminding her of the cage she had unknowingly stepped into. She had no idea what the job was, where it would lead, or who she was truly dealing with. All she knew was that there was no way out anymore. As she walked down the dimly lit hallway, the shadows stretched longer, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The hallway felt like a maze, one she couldn't find her way out of, even if she tried. She had been given an address, a task, and there was no question about whether she would do it. She had no choice. As she reached the exit, the man who had first greeted her appeared again, standing silently by the door, waiting for her. You ready? He asked, his voice as calm and steady as always. Samantha didn't answer right away. She was still trying to process everything, trying to make sense of how her life had spiraled so quickly out of control. But there was nothing to say. She had to go. Yes, she finally whispered, the word feeling hollow as it left her mouth. Good, he replied. Let's go. Time to make sure everything is in place. He opened the door, and she stepped outside into the cool night. The streets were quiet, the city feeling distant and empty, as though it, too, had been drawn into this dark world. The man didn't speak again as they walked. Samantha couldn't even remember the last time she had felt a sense of freedom. It was gone now, swallowed up by the promises of power and the threats of consequences. As they arrived at the car, the man handed her a small, plain envelope, just like the one that had started this all. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "Don't make any mistakes. The next part of the plan depends on you." Samantha took the envelope, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with an address written in neat handwriting. She glanced at it briefly, her mind already racing with what would happen next. The car's engine rumbled to life, and without another word, they set off into the night. The city outside the window blurred into nothingness, the familiar streets now unfamiliar, a sign that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. As they neared the destination, her nerves tightened, her stomach churning. The address was in an industrial district, a part of town that looked forgotten, abandoned. The kind of place that didn't make sense in the daylight but felt dangerous under the cover of night. The car slowed as they pulled into a dark parking lot. The only light came from the flickering street lamps, casting long shadows over the area. The man turned to her, his gaze piercing through the darkness. "This is where you get out," he said. "Do your part, and we'll be done with you." Samantha's throat felt dry as she nodded, her body still frozen with fear. She had no idea what doing her part meant, but she knew she couldn't back out. She couldn't walk away. "Remember," he added, his voice hardening, "you have no choice now. Fail, and it won't be just you who suffers." His words felt like a warning, one she couldn't ignore. With one last glance, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the cold night. Samantha stood there for a moment, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on her chest. She had been thrust into this world by forces beyond her control, and now she was expected to play her part. She wasn't sure how she was going to make it through the night, but she knew there was no going back. Taking a deep breath, she moved toward the building ahead. The door was old, rusted, and creaked loudly as she pushed it open. The interior was dimly lit, the only sound the echo of her footsteps on the concrete floor. She walked deeper into the building, her heart racing in her chest. The silence felt oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in around her. At the end of the hall, a door stood open. She stepped inside, and for the first time, she saw the people who had been pulling the strings from the shadows. The room was filled with men and women, their faces masked with indifference. They didn't look up when she entered. "You're late," one of them said, not bothering to glance in her direction. Samantha swallowed, the tension in the room almost suffocating. She wanted to speak, to ask what was going on, but she knew better than to show any weakness. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence in the room stretched, and then the man who had spoken earlier stood up, his cold eyes locking onto hers. "You'll deliver the message," he said, his voice chilling. "And if it's not done right, we'll make sure you regret it." Samantha's heart raced as she took in the weight of his words. She had no idea what she was getting into, but she knew it was too late to back out now. She nodded, the realization settling in that her life was no longer in her hands. The man motioned for her to follow him, and as she did, the sound of her footsteps seemed to grow louder, echoing in her ears, a constant reminder of the path she had chosen, a path that had no exit. She had crossed the point of no return. Now, there was only one way forward. Immerse yourself in a gripping dark romance that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Samantha finds herself trapped in a world she never asked for, tangled in a dangerous web where power, fear, and control define her every move. Her life takes a dramatic turn when she becomes entangled in the unforgiving world of mafia bosses, debts that stretch beyond her understanding, and an unpredictable fate that forces her into a series of dangerous tasks. As she navigates this dark romance, Samantha faces increasingly difficult challenges, meeting mysterious figures who want her to carry out their bidding. With every decision, the lines between right and wrong blur, and she must confront the terrifying reality of her situation. This dark romance pulls Samantha deeper into a world where there's no turning back, and each new step brings her closer to the edge of destruction or salvation. Will she find a way out, or will she be consumed by the power that holds her? Follow Samantha's harrowing journey as she fights to survive in a world where love, betrayal, and danger collide. A thrilling dark romance awaits those who dare to step into the shadows, where every action has a price, and every choice leads to unexpected consequences.